You're listening to Everything Out There with your host, Steve Stockton.
Hello, friends. Now, popular music has always been a powerful medium for cultural expression, reflecting the collective consciousness of society. Beyond its surface melodies and lyrics, some argue that there exists a hidden layer of influence, an occult dimension, if you will, that has woven its threads through the fabric of various musical genres. In this episode, we're going to explore the enigmatic connection between the occult and popular music, examining how artists have drawn inspiration from mystical traditions, symbolism, and esoteric practices to create a unique and sometimes controversial musical landscape. Many musicians incorporate occult symbolism and imagery into their work. From album covers to t-shirts to stage performances, the use of mystical symbols such as pentagrams, all-seeing eyes, and occult rituals and visuals creates an atmosphere of mystery and intrigue. Artists like Led Zeppelin, with their iconic Zozo symbol, or Madonna, known for incorporating Kabbalistic symbols, demonstrate how occult aesthetics become an integral part of music culture. The lyrics of songs often contain cryptic messages and references to occult concepts, whether exploring themes of mysticism, alchemy, or spirituality. Artists embed layers of meaning that may go unnoticed for the casual listener. Occult-themed lyrics can be found across genres, from the poetic mysticism of Bob Dylan to the dark, esoteric themes in heavy metal bands like Black Sabbath. Some musicians openly embrace occult ideologies as a means of personal and spiritual exploration. From the interest in Eastern mysticism by the Beatles during the 1960s to the New Age influences on contemporary artists. A quest for transcendence and self-discovery through occult practice has been a recurring motif in the music industry. The intersection of the occult and popular music often sparks controversy. Accusations of satanic affiliations have haunted various artists, leading to public outcry and moral panics. The 1980s, for example, witnessed the infamous Satanic Panic, fueled by concerns over alleged subliminal messages in music, most notably in heavy metal. The commodification of occult aesthetics for commercial gain is evident in the fashion, merchandise, and marketing strategies employed by musicians. While some argue that this dilutes the genuine spiritual aspects, others see it as a reflection of the mainstream acceptance and fascination with occult symbolism. The occult influence in popular music is a multifaceted phenomenon that transcends genres and eras. Whether viewed as a genuine exploration of mystical realms or as an exploitive marketing tool, the occult's presence in music continues to captivate and provoke. As long as artists draw inspiration from the mysterious and esoteric, the connection between the occult and pop music will exist, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome once again to Everything Out There. And joining me tonight on the phones once again is Pastor Eric and Justin from Sound the Shofar Messianic Ministries. And tonight we're going to be talking about occult influences in rock music. Welcome in, fellas.
Welcome. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's been talked about, and I've read several books on it myself and watched lots of videos and things, but there seems to be an underlying occultic theme and influence in a lot of popular music, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'll let either one of you jump in, and we'll get started here.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to look at, because it's also been a question on some people's minds for a while, at what point did this enter into music? And now, if you look back to the history of music, there are some people that argued that, well, it went back to the 1930s with Robert Johnson, but it could also be argued that it went back as far as the early 1700s with Giuseppe Tartini. And of course, the famous violin song he did, The Devil's Trill. But actually, I'm going to say it goes back even further. And I'm going to say it goes back as far as probably before or right about the time that Satan was expelled from heaven. And I want to go ahead and take a look at that and look at Ezekiel chapter 28, starting in verse 11. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyre, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was the covering, the sardius to topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes were prepared in thee in the day that thou was created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so thou was upon the holy mountain of God. Thou was walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. All right. Now, if you go back to the beginning of this chapter, the chapter is actually referring to the king of Tyre and his haughtiness, his arrogance, and so forth. However, once you get into verse 11, this is no longer talking about the king of Tyre. This is not even, as a matter of fact, if you listen to the words very carefully, it's not even describing a human being. And how do we know? For example, this individual is full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. There is no human being who holds perfection of any kind, whether outward appearance or inward, because since the fall of the Garden of Eden, we are all imperfect. And the words that are used here is the word is perfect in beauty. In other words, perfect in appearance. The next thing to notice is it becomes clear not only is this an angel, but it is specifically Satan. And we see this in verse 14. Thou art was the anointed cherub that covereth. Now, depending on what commentaries you read, there's some believe that Lucifer, who became Satan, Lucifer was one of the two cherubs, one of the two angels that covered the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. The lid of the Ark of the Covenant, as you know, has two angels that are prostrated with their faces down and their wings arced up and touching in the middle. And there's some commentaries that believe that one of those angels and Ezekiel's talking about that covers is Lucifer. Now, we have that in verse 14. And then how do we know specifically that this is talking about Lucifer? And the answer to that is in verse 13. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. In Genesis chapter 3, the serpent is in Eden, right? Revelation chapter 12, verse 9 makes it clear who the serpent was. The serpent was Satan. So who was in Eden? It was Satan. Now, what does any of this have to do with music? And verse 13 talks about the workmanship of gold and the tabrets or timbrels, which are tambourines. And then it talks about the pipes, which is a wind instrument. Satan was the music minister of heaven as we go through the entirety of Ezekiel 28. So automatically, would there be a connection to Satan to music? And right here, it's very clear what he was. Now, Scripture also talks about the prince of the power of the air. In modern times, how is music transmitted? How are the signals transmitted? By airwaves. So we have a direct biblical connection to Satan and to music. So I would say even before Giuseppe Tartini in the 1700s, when he wrote The Devil's Trill, which is about when the devil came to him one night and gave him the notes and everything and so forth. It goes back way before then. It goes back right at the dawn of time. Brother Justin, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, what's interesting is you talked about with the music, but also if you look in verse 13, every precious stone was your covering: sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, oxen, jasper, sapphire. I mean, these are very precious elements and very precious stones. So not only was Satan or Lucifer a powerful music minister, but he was also very beautiful to look at. If you know, in 2 Corinthians 11:14, it says, "And no wonder Satan himself transfigureth himself into an angel of light." And so basically, I would argue too, not only when people would make a deal, as they would say, with the devil about the music, because take for example, help me, the guy who was at the crossroads in Mississippi who couldn't play an instrument comes back and plays
Robert
like
Johnson.
crazy. What's that?
Yes, Robert Johnson.
Robert Johnson. And some of these people, well, and if you look at it too, some of these guys were not that attractive, and they would have beautiful women on their side. So I think, as we talk about, as Satan is good with music, he was also good about possibly enhancing some of these guys' looks as well, because he himself was beautiful as well, as Ezekiel 28 talks about.
Yeah, and now the story of Robert Johnson is in the 1930s. He used to play at like this local little bar in Mississippi, and according to the people that knew him, said he was just horrible. His guitar playing was just twangy. Some of the people that knew him said he sounded out of tune. Couldn't really carry tune too well. And then he disappears for a couple weeks. No one sees him. And he goes to the crossroads. And supposedly it was there he made a deal with Satan, and then comes back, and all of a sudden his guitar playing just went from barely amateur, from the way I've heard it described, to all of a sudden, I mean, he is absolutely cutting chords. And it's very interesting because toward the end of his life and his career, he made such songs as The Hellhounds and Devil on My Trail, which he talks about regretting that he actually made a deal with Satan, and that he's constantly on the run from it. So now again, a lot of this, and you know how the game of telephone works, right? A lot of this could have a touch of that. In other words, there could have been embellishments along the way. There could have been added stuff. You don't know, because word of mouth just tends to do that as it goes further down the line. But and in claims, it does come down to almost the same story. So you have the account of Robert Johnson. Well, going back before that is Aleister Crowley, and we are talking one of the most absolutely depraved, evil, I mean, just absolutely evil to the core individuals. And he was actually evil enough that people that knew him labeled him literally as 666, the beast. And his works, I mean, so some of the, when I was researching this, I had to stop several times. Some of his works and some of other people's accounts about him that knew him, he was absolutely just evil and depraved to the core. And what's interesting is there was no music industry during Crowley's time. And Aleister Crowley himself said, "I will influence children and the world by music."
And I think,
and again, the late 1800s.
It looks like Pastor Eric may be experiencing some difficulties there. Hopefully, he'll be back with us in just a moment.
Well,
But,
I can basically kind of add on and talk about Aleister Crowley. Basically summoned a demon or an entity called Coronado Zone, I think is the name, and basically convinced that this was a fallen angel, more than likely. But it goes back to that this demon originated by the writing of Edward Kelly and John Dee, which were into Occultism magic, and became an important element of the mystical system of Thelema, which was founded by Aleister Crowley. Now, with this demon, basically, it was been to believe that this thing came out of the abyss, and Crowley states that he and a guy named Victor Benjamin Neuerberg evoked this demon in December of 1909, and the account is that they evoked it through a Solomonic triangle while Crowley sat elsewhere, and Crowley himself was the medium into which the demon was invoked. And they're talking about things where there's one account stated that the house even rose up as they invited this thing in. It was into belief too that this is where that Crowley believes that he saw that this demon was also the gray figure as well. And the demon is used, it is invoked in a lot of music. I was trying to find it where it talked about it, but basically he was used by another account of this demon was used in a band, and I think gosh, who was it? I forgot the name, but there was a band that was a heavy metal band that used the same demon as well, and is using a lot in rock and roll.
Well, in in a lot of Crowley's accounts, I mean, this guy has been a member of several occultic groups, several occultic organizations. What was it? The Golden Dawn. He was a member of. I can't remember the name of the Russian woman, but she had started a group, and when I was looking at his list of memberships, that was one of them. And according to one documentary, the Boleskine House in Scotland, he had lived there for 6 months, and he had went there specifically to conjure that particular demon along with others, and then was going to send them back, but he never finished. He had upped and left, which left these things basically running free, I guess, if you will. So would those demonic spirits still be prevalent today? Absolutely. And the problem is that these things, it's not that they just came into music, but they were purposely placed there. And that is actually, I could get into that later on, but they were actually purposely placed there. Crowley, it's kind of, because when you follow Crowley's career and his life, it's not very clear exactly what his ultimate end goal was. What his ultimate achievement was, what was going to be in life. And it kind of seems like he switched around, different occultic groups. If you read his writings, he doesn't really stay on task. Like, he has a lot of starting points on particular magic, on invokings, on incantations and stuff like that. But he's very chaotic. He's very chaotic, and like I said, I'm not a Crowley expert by any means, and to be honest with you, I don't think I would want to be one. But just everything I've researched, he just seems like a very chaotic individual. Very chaotic individual, doesn't really seem to stay on task with anything in particular. I think the example at the Boleskine house is one. The fact that he just switched from the Golden Dawn to this group, to that group, to this group, to that group. And in his books, it's just, he goes from idea to idea to idea to idea. He doesn't really seem to be on task or really into completing anything. Now, personally, I think that also has a lot of markers of Satan as well, because Satan is represented by 6, which is incomplete, whereas 7 represents God, because 7 represents completion. Now, I do not think he was the Antichrist or is the Antichrist, although I think he in some way is somewhat of a prophetic picture of the characteristic of the Antichrist that is to come. Just personally, I could see that very clearly. But it was interesting because a couple documentaries I had researched about Crowley. There is a lot of paranormal activity in the ruins of the Boleskine house, as well as his other house in England. And according to this one paranormal group, I can't believe this. They brought Ouija boards to both locations, and they also tried a little bit of Kabbalah rituals, and the head of the group talked about how it's ruining his life, and how the experience has ruined relationships, his life, and he had to move out of his home actually because the demonic activity that was at Boleskine house followed him home. And then he had on his GoPro the activity that was going on in his house, and it was definitely clearly there. There was something going on there. And it's in. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there was a group there that went there, I think, probably prior to that one. And somebody reported stating that while they were in the area, they stated that they could see shadow figures, but somebody in the group, something physically picked up somebody by the throat and then dropped them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, somebody in this group got scratched and I think pulled.
Yeah. I don't know if it was this one or whatever, but there was one person that went into kind of veering off and talking about when people start trying to talk to these things. There was a lady's face that they saw on the camera. Her face contorted into like this dark demonic grin.
That wouldn't shock me. And the problem with Satan and the occult going into the music industry, it doesn't stop there.
No,
because I believe that's where they use it. They use the industry as propaganda and as programmers.
Yep.
Programming generation after generation, more accepting to ultimately the Antichrist, accepting the Antichrist and coming into the Antichrist kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So music and entertainment is just an avenue that Satan and the occult use. Because again, ultimately, what is the end game? The ultimate end game for them is the completion and the fruition of Revelation 13. And music is a very powerful way, especially if it could be wielded and used to ultimately move people to that direction, because that is what the end game is.
And if you look at just the far-reaching his influence, has started, like I said, prior to Robert Johnson, but through pop, basically all of pop music, from the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to modern day Led Zeppelin. There's a really good book by a man named Lance Gilbert. He's an American, but he's lived in New Zealand for the last decade or so. He's a friend of mine. He's written a book called The Led Zeppelin Curse, and it talks about the haunted Boleskine mansion there, and and all the things that have happened there prior to Page owning it, while Page owned it, and then after it burned down, the things that have continued to go on there. So Crowley's legacy, I mean, it's out there. Those bands have not only cited him as an influence, he was on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album, and then Led Zeppelin 4. He's represented there through the tarot card of the Hermit, and it goes on and on and on.
Oh, and absolutely. The fact that Jimmy Page bought that place just blows me away, knowing who and what had been there.
And he was more or less an acolyte of Crowley's. He owned a bookstore in London that specialized in rare occult materials. He had a lot of Crowley first editions. He even bought things that had come from the estate of Crowley, objects that had belonged to the man, and he was dedicated to him. And I guess if you look at it from that aspect, he was sort of the ultimate fan, even buying Boleskine House there, just to continue his fascination with Crowley and his words. And then you get into all the backwards messages and thing. And there's a recording of Crowley out there talking about those things that he instructs his followers to do. And part of that is to learn to do things backwards. And I think that's just a mockery of everything good and holy. And yeah, he was, they had that nickname after he was kicked out of Italy and exiled back to England, that they called him the wickedest man alive. There was nothing good about him. And he was just, pardon the phrase, but hell bent on seeing what all he could get away with. I mean, drugs, promiscuity, everything. And then this is the person that's influenced the people that are influencing the young people of those generations when rock music started. It's amazing what just one person with that kind of evil intent and the aid of these demonic entities that he conjured, how far that can reach. And it's still felt today, even in popular music. A lot of videos and things that they claim have satanic influence. Some of your more recent stars, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, all these people that are popular for no real reason, it seems like, other than whatever is controlling them, their programmers, their handlers, and from the demonic and satanic side of it.
You know what's interesting, if you watch videos when people go to his house in Scotland, it's like a dump. It's ruined. And basically people have talked about where they have seen things go on.
And I've heard accounts that when Crowley lived there, that the villagers were afraid of the place. They said that they would pass by it, and sometimes it would be pitch black on the inside of the house during the daytime. There was such an evil influence there, whatever he had conjured. And that's a very interesting point, that he didn't finish that particular working and left those things loose. And then that goes on into, if you've studied about a man named Jack Parsons, who was a founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also a follower of Crowley. And he went out in the desert in the 40s, not too long before Crowley's death, I believe, and attempted to do Crowley's Babylon working. And there's people that claim that whatever he was doing there, that it created some kind of rift in time or space or whatever, let these entities through. And that ushered in the modern day UFO era. Shortly after that, you had Kenneth Arnold's sighting in Washington. You had Roswell, and it just goes on. And that kind of ties in to the books that you've written, Pastor Eric, about the UFOs being demonic entities and things, or having something to do with that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you brought up Jack Parsons, because that also brings up L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, who was also a Crowleyite, if you will.
It all ties together.
Well, here's something else. When Page bought Boleskine House, he had John Bonham, Zeppelin's drummer, come and stay with him for a little bit, and Bonham died there. Bonham died at Boleskine House, which is really sad, because John Bonham was just an absolutely very gifted drummer and percussionist. But he died there. And when he died, I mean, that pretty much signaled the end of the Zeppelin saga, the Zeppelin saga, because they didn't continue on as Zeppelin. Now, I know Robert Plant went on and did solo projects. I know Jimmy Page went on, did The Firm, and did some other solo things. But that was the end. That was the end of the Zeppelin band, was the death of Bonham.
Yeah, and again, about 10 years there, which is, according to the Robert Johnson legend, that's what his deal was in exchange for, although he only made it 8 before he was assassinated. And I've been to the Crossroads there in Clarksdale, Mississippi. Now, there's a tourist one that they have set up, but that's not the real Crossroads. It's farther away out of town, and you have to find a local to take you down there, and I wouldn't recommend it. That's a very creepy place. There's just a lot of bad energy and things down there. But if you look at how many bands have had a founding member, pass away under mysterious circumstances, and you have Bonham there, you have Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, one of the early members of the Beatles died, I think, of an aneurysm or something like that. It almost seems like that's maybe a part of the deal, is that there's a death in there somewhere. AC/DC's another one. Their first lead singer, Bon Scott, passed away. And then it seems like all these bands that have achieved just all this acclaim and international success, and just a part of the rock music iconography, if you will, they've had a member die under mysterious circumstances. What are your thoughts on that?
Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Joplin. My gosh, I mean, just there's so many to mention, and if you look at the circumstances, especially with Hendrix, it was interesting when he left the original label and band that was assigned to him, and decided to go with his own. And shortly thereafter, he died.
Then you have the curious 2700 club, or the 27 club rather, where all these musicians and members of bands and actors and things like that passed away at the age of 27.
At 27 years of age.
I think there's something to all that. It's more than coincidence, I think, that many have passed away at that particular age. Now, there's some that were really close to that age, some that were just past it, but 27, that I mean, like, that's a theory out there.
Seems like the numeric marker. You were talking about modern day today, music today. The halftime shows at Super Bowls, Grammy Awards and stuff. It is absolutely satanic to the core. I mean, satanic to the core. And now, whereas in the 70s and the 80s, they kind of tried to hide it, kind of tried to deny it, although on many metal albums, they weren't really trying to hide anything. But whereas back in the 70s and the 80s, it seems like the occult and Satanism was just going after one particular genre, which was metal. And now it encompasses every genre of music. You could see the occult influence. And again, they're not even hiding it anymore. They're not even trying to conceal it anymore. It is flat out open, basically in everyone's face.
If you also look at rap, I think that is extremely cursed too, because think about people that get into it and then are shot dead within a month or a week, and how that has a high curse, and how this has a lot of the occultic and Masonic stuff behind it as well. You look at, but you also look at how these people have tried to make fun of God. There was a comedian, she was making a comment about God and then just like passes out. There was a rapper that made a comment and ends up with a mysterious illness too. So you're also seeing the Lord getting his, trying to bring people unto himself as well.
Well, Crowley had a saying from his work, The Law of Thelema. And the saying is, do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. Do what thou wilt. In other words, whatever you want to do, you go and do it, regardless of consequences of any kind. And I really got to thinking about that, especially when I'm considering Torah and the 613. That's the 613 commandments, statutes, and ordinances of that God gave to Moses. And do what thou wilt. That one statement, just that one action, actually violates every 613, every one of the 613, because God's giving of the laws, and what the laws require is, it's not about you. It's not about what pleases the individual. It's not about what will benefit materialistically the individual. The law is about honoring God and doing that which honors God, doing that which is good for other people. And do what thou wilt flies in the face of every bit of that, if you think about it.
Well, if you remember the Book of Judges, the conclusion was, for they did what was right in their own eyes. It's lust. It's what I want to do. If it makes me feel good, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was interesting, Brother Steve, you brought up the Beatles and Crowley. The Sgt. Pepper album, and you brought this up, has Crowley off in the far left.
Mm-hmm.
And the same year that album came out, that Rolling Stone album came out, that also had Crowley on it. And I got to thinking, and I did a little research. Now, again, there are different takes on this. but the song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was 20 years ago today, Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Well, it turns out that the 20-year marker, it was the date 20 years prior to that album that Crowley died. And supposedly Sgt. Pepper is Crowley, or is supposed to represent Crowley. Now, again, I've heard differing things and varying things, but I just thought it interesting that was one of the possibilities.
And there's even a rumor out there that Paul McCartney possibly could claim to be one of Crowley's offspring. The years fit there, and he has a side project. I think it's called The Fireman, and the name of one of the albums is The Magician's Son. And it's known that, like I said, the Beatles referenced Crowley. I always thought it was more John Lennon than Paul McCartney, but again, who knows? And there's so many. It's like an octopus with 1,000 tentacles. There's so much stuff out there that has Crowley's touch or imprint on it, even to this day.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I want to say it was 90 or 91. I can't remember. But the Chili Peppers album, Sex, Blood, and Magic, it had several hits off that album. But Sex, Blood, and Magic is Crowley's formula. I mean, it's directly, verbatim, Crowley's formula. Oh gosh, there was another, and I thought I had it in my notes. Let me see if I could find it. But I do want to point out also that Crowley, I mean, but besides just Crowley's character, it's interesting that in the 1960s, the end of the 50s and into the 60s, a very devout Crowleyite by the name of Anton LaVey came about. And again, it was the 60s where you saw Crowley's influence in with the Beatles, with the Rolling Stones. But not only that, think about the entire hippie movement in the 60s. The whole concept and the whole mindset behind the hippie movement was do what thou wilt. You know, you're no longer under the constraints of the conservative 50s anymore.
Yeah, and that was the from the Book of the Law that supposedly was dictated to Crowley by one of these entities that he conjured up.
Yeah, and if you look at the whole thing, the free love and sex and the music and everything, every bit of that, every aspect of that, again, goes back to Crowley's teachings and Crowley's fundamental beliefs. But it's also interesting that when that movement happened, look who happened to pop up at the time. LaVey and the First Satanic Church.
Yeah, and then his influence,
and from what I
influence was far-reaching too in Hollywood and music and things. You see him with celebrities, and in particular Jane Mansfield and Sammy Davis Jr. and people like that. It was an in vogue thing, sort of there at one time among the Hollywood elite to be a part of the Church of Satan under LaVey's tutelage.
Yeah, and there's actually a handful of actors and musicians today that are part of LaVey's church. I think it's his daughter and the guy she married are running the show now.
Yeah, that was
what is his daughter's name?
Zena LaVey, I think. And I can't remember the name of the guy that she married. I could look real quick, but he was known for his involvement with all things evil too.
Well, and
Shrek, Nicholas
and I'm sitting here looking at
she was married to, and
Shrek.
And Shrek was into just all kinds of stuff.
Well, I'm looking at Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 11 here. And it reads, "When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations." And of course, this is addressing Israel entering into its land, and not to pick up the practices and beliefs of the Hivites, the Hittites, the Canaanites, and so forth. Because and they were heavy occultists, by the way. Moloch worshippers, Baal worshippers. And it goes on to say, "There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer." Magic, which is divination, and necromancy, which is summoning or conjuring the dead, or communication with the dead. Again, this is these commandments here address every bit and practice of Crowleyism, along with other stuff as well.
What it also does is, I think that it opens up. You open up things that you shouldn't open up. You invite something in that I think will have destruction upon the land, destruction upon family households, whatever the case may be. Because once it's invited, it's not going to leave, and the ramifications through generations will be there. And I think this kind of, we veer off the topic, but I think it talks about that's what these triangulations are. I think Crowley's home in Scotland is a triangulation because it opens up those things to come out. They summon them. And when they're summoned and they're there, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to move. And so that's why I believe the Lord says that it's abominable and testable, because you are opening something up that you should not open up. You're inviting something into this world that when it manifests and takes over, it's going to destroy whoever summons it and lives throughout forever. Even when they become believers, these things still think they have control of them, and they don't, because it's what the Lord's blood did on the cross. It canceled all those covenants.
Yeah, and by the way, as far as Boleskine House being a portal there, the cemetery that I want to say it's in front of the property. It's a very old cemetery, but several of the graves there belong to witches, former witches, and this several of those graves long predate Aleister Crowley. So I think there was definite demonic activity there long before Crowley got there, but I think Crowley would have brought it to its fullest. Definitely.
And then you think about that house, Boleskine is right there on the shores of Loch Ness, where you have the Loch Ness Monster. That's a thing that's been seen there for probably hundreds of years. So I've heard it put forth that maybe that's some kind of demonic entity. And that's why Crowley, one of the reasons anyway, that he picked that place was whatever this thing was. Because if you think about it, as long as it's been seen there, there's got to be more than one of them, or it's something that lives a long, long time, like say a desert tortoise or something like that. This is a strange area, that whole part of Scotland.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that up, because I was just thinking about that. Is that not a coincidence? It just happens to be right on the shore.
Yeah. And personally, I don't believe in coincidences when it comes to things like that. I think synchronicities. I think that's part of the reason that he picked Boleskine, because of where it was and because of the things that had gone on there in the loch for decades prior to him being there.
Well, and,
yeah,
and also you probably look into it. If you look at it, there's sightings of cryptoids and Bigfoots in that area as well, which goes back to the concept of the triangulation again. When you mess or violate Deuteronomy 18, you're going to open up things, or things are going to be created, and people are going to have legends or anything based upon that. And so, once again, when you do some form of massive movement as they did, you open up things, and things take over the land, and they're going to do what they're going to do to instill fear among people upon generations to come.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Not to mention, not just the 1500s, the 1300s, but even a little bit before then, you had many pagan groups and tribes that were indigenous in that area. Several of them, to be exact.
Yeah, it's almost like, we talked before about the ley lines and these points of the triangles and things in a lot of these mysterious triangles, like the Bermuda Triangle, the Alaskan Triangle. But if you look at the ley lines throughout the UK there, that Loch Ness and that whole area follows that path of some of the earth mysteries, if you will, the standing stones, and some of those structures that predate Christianity, and no telling what those people were up to, ritual sacrifice and who knows what.
Oh yeah, not to mention what country is it with the Stonehenge?
Yep, I think it's the UK.
Yeah, that's in the UK. It's in England. It's English.
Yeah, England. Well, that was Stonehenge, if I'm correct. That's that was the work of the Druids, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah, supposedly it's used as a calendar, and then they believe there was a rock there that had grooves on the outer edges of it that looked to be gutters for blood from these ritual sacrifices, and that's something that you have in some of these pyramids. Especially in South America and places like that, there will be an altar stone there. So this is far-reaching and predates Christianity, whether it be Druid or pagan or what have you. There's been a lot of bloodshed in the name of not so nice things.
Well, and it goes back to what we talked about, that it's a It's a mockery of God's
Yeah,
sacrifice.
that is.
It goes back to being a mockery of God's sacrificial system, and I think what it boils down to is the human sacrifice or murder or anything is very precious to God because it's God's image, and when these sacrifices are taking place or blood is spilt upon the land, it gives them the reason to be there until the one who came upon the cross and died, and when he died, he canceled all those contracts and stuff like that. So and if you look at the various forms of vast murders or anything, you will find always activity, or sometimes when people go into a home and and I think was it the guy from Led Zeppelin talked about when he was staying in Crowley's home that he had sleep paralysis? I think, I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was one of the caretakers that stayed there when Jimmy Page wasn't there, and he had lots of the caretaker had a lot of strange experiences and things there, and things tried to chase him out of there, and he would see shadows and shadow figures and things like that, and sleep paralysis. Yeah, that was part of the story.
That's interesting. You brought up the shadow figures. This group that went and investigated Boleskine House. That was one of the first things they saw on a couple occasions were shadow figures, moving shadow figures.
And again, that ties into all this demonic manifestations and entities and things like that vex people. And you talked about the people that went there and did a paranormal investigation. They ended up with some sort of attachments. I've run across that several times from people, and it's not always some places hardcore as a Boleskine house. It can be, just the haunted house up the block or whatever. People that don't understand how those things work and don't, lack of a better word, appreciate the power that some of those entities have. You can end up with some nasty things attaching itself to you and following you home and carrying on.
Well, yeah, and again, that's and brother Justin's brought this up on a couple occasions. That is why in the Torah, God is very strict and very, very clear as far as why one should not engage in any kind of those practices, because of what it opens up, what it can bring about, the kind of damage that it does, not only to an individual, but to individuals connected to that particular individual that would engage in that kind of activity. God is very clear on that.
And those things kind of have a domino effect. I've read an account one time about some girls that were just fooling around with a Ouija board and tried to conjure a demon, and they ended up conjuring 13. And every one of the girls in that group, something happened to them. One died in an accident, another broke her leg, another's parents died. There was just, it created, like I said, a snowball effect, if you will. And that's, again, it's not something that you want to fool around with, especially not knowing what you're doing. And even these black magicians like Crowley and Jack Parsons and people like that, there were certain ways that ritual had to be done. You had to open things up and you had to close things back, or you're going to have a lot of problems with these things if you just let them run wild.
Well, and I think that is also the part of Satan's trickery is the fact that the people that perform these rituals actually think, as mortals, because that's all they are, like any human, they're just mortal, can actually have control over an entity that is not immortal. And I think that's a false illusion.
And there's story
that,
after story
these
after
things
story of
give.
people fooling with these things, and they think that they're in control, and it ends up controlling them from to the point of obsession and possibly oppression and even possession as the end result of that, just from something that they thought, oh, this is really just a party game or whatever. And I think that's one of the biggest lies that's been foisted on people, that the Ouija board is a party game, when it's not. It can be dangerous. I've known people that literally ruined their lives from using one and getting drawn into that part of the occult.
Well, you're talking about an area where people will get an interest in this stuff is through they have an experience or something. Like, for example, we talk about sleep paralysis, and the Bible talks about in Song of Solomon 5:2. It talks about that while I was asleep, you awake me. And sometimes people will get an encounter where they think it's someone that has come from the dead or whatever. They've helped them cross over, whatever, and they get hooked into searching out these things or whatever, and being tricked by this stuff. And if you ever notice, a lot of people that are doing the paranormal investigation and stuff, their lives end up becoming destroyed. They mysteriously die. They can't explain what's going on. Marriage falls apart. It almost becomes like something like in the book of Job, but the difference is that Job was being tested. You see the Job syndrome happen, where they lose everything falls apart, mysteriously get charges put against them, they go to prison, whatever the case may be, because they think they're doing something, and they open the door and their life spirals out of control.
Well, what else I find very interesting as far as Satan in the music industry, because Satan is a contradiction. Everything about his character, everything about those who follow him, is very contradictory. And when you watch those awards show, you will see these artists doing the hand gesture, occult hand gestures, wearing stuff that has Crowley sayings on it, and they get an award, and they're a part of the occult, and they sit there and then go, I want to thank God for this award. Think about the contradiction of that.
Yeah, indeed. For a rap album that glorifies drugs and sex and violence, and then they stand there and thank God, I think they're thanking their God, not the one true God, but the God that they worship. And that's therein lies the rub.
Yeah. Well, I just, as a teenager, growing up, I was your typical early mid 80s metalhead, and I saw several concerts, from big names to just getting started groups that did eventually make it big. But I remember some of them had the most darkest artwork and some of the darkest titles of songs.
Yeah.
And at the end of the concert, you would hear the band would say, "Thank you, everyone." A few choice words, of course, they would throw in that. And then thank you, everyone. God bless you. Good night.
Yeah. And yeah, the some of those album covers, I mean, like Iron Maiden or Ozzy, who we're going to get to probably in the continuation of this episode, Ronnie James Dio, Uh, it's on and on and on. There's always that fascination. Then you had ones that were very overt about it, bands like Slayer and bands like that just it was right in your face. They didn't try to hide it or, kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge at the devil. It was just right out there in the open that this is, who we serve.
Well, what's interesting is going back to Black Sabbath. Do you remember the first album?
Yeah,
it was just called
Countryside, and there's I think it's on the back of the vinyl album cover. There's like a woman in the trees there, and she's wearing a black dress, but she's got kind of a green skin tone or something, alluding to her being a witch.
Yes. There was a story I heard about one of the band members who was actually into occult type of stuff. I want to say it was the bass player, Geezer Butler.
I believe that's correct. That's when you started talking about that. I believe it was Geezer. And the story, if I remember it correctly, he had some kind of book about the occult or something in his room that he had been reading, and some kind of dark shape came into the room and was standing over his bed, and he attributed it to just having that book there.
Yes, you're exactly right, and you think about the band name, Black Sabbath. In other words, a dark Sabbath. And then you think about the song Black Sabbath, and it was if I remember the lyrics, it was almost exactly what Geezer Butler was describing when he came up with the idea for the song. Big black shape with eyes of fire, telling people their desire, and so on and so on. And I read another account. That they went into a well-known haunted spot to work on another album.
Yeah, it was been an old. It was an abandoned convent, if I remember correctly. They went there to finish off their work on. Don't think it was the first album, but the several different members recall being visited by some kind of ghost that supposedly haunted the grounds of that. I guess it was an abbey or a nunnery, or I'm not sure the terminology there. But definitely something dark and evil was influencing their music, because it was out of that encounter where Geezer woke up and saw that mysterious cloaked figure standing at the foot of his bed after he had spent time that night reading through his various occult books there. That was what inspired the song Black Sabbath, like you were talking about.
Yeah, I just it just amazes me because I think back when I was a very, very, very young teenager, and Black Sabbath was my band. I mean, that was I must have played that album and album till where the vinyl was almost had holes punctured into it. It was so scratched so bad.
Yeah,
but
I had it on vinyl, had it on cassette, wore out cassettes,
and just looking at the content of the lyrics, and
I never got to see Black Sabbath in their original incarnation. I saw him with after Ozzy, and then I saw Ozzy out on his own. Didn't get to see any of their reunion shows. That was after my time of going to rock concerts. But
Yeah,
it was almost like a religious experience for the people that like their music to attend one of their concerts.
well, the one thing I remember is just and not just with Black Sabbath, Rainbow, and Zeppelin especially. There's a every one of the songs just has a very medievalish, dark feeling to it. Like it's kind of hard to describe, but those songs and those bands, everything just kind of had like a dark, kind of ominous feel to it. The sound of the music, obviously the album covers, but just the sounds of each song, just it's really hard to describe, but there's a darkness to it. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
There is. I don't know if it's the particular chords they use or what, but there is something in there that stirs up those. I mean, if you're just listening to the music, some of the instrumentals, it has that dark nature, that dark feeling to it. So a sense of foreboding or doom. In fact, that some of that type of music is called doom rock, and just because that's the feeling that you get from listening to it.
And it's really a shame, because out of all genres of music, it's always been metal. It's always been metal that has the most talented musicians. I mean, the most skilled, talented musicians has always been heavy metal. I mean, let's be honest. There's very few other genres of music, as far as like guitar players go, that come close to most of your old heavy metal guitar players. As far as skill goes, as far as talent goes, I mean, heavy metal, it just had some of the most talented musicians.
I mean, like Randy Rhoads that we've talked about, Yngwie Malmsteen, even Angus Young from AC/DC. It's more of a bluesy type rock thing that he does. But again, Ted Nugent, some of your musicians, I'll get it out in a minute, that you think of, that some of the greatest, some of the best artists as far as mastering their instruments. And I think a lot of that, it's the roots in classical music that they've drawn from. And a lot of metalheads will argue with you about that. I used to get into that confrontation a lot, but it's a lot of the notes and the chord progressions things are based in darker classical pieces that have been updated and done with electric guitars and things. There's that influence to it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and then Jimmy Page and the violin bow to his Les Paul. My goodness, who does that?
Who would have thought about that? And it did make an odd and unusual sound. And getting back to that book that I was talking about by Lance Gilbert, The Led Zeppelin Curse, I was corresponding with him at one time, and he said, watch the concert film, The Led Zeppelin, at Madison Square Garden. I think its Song Remains the Same, I think is the name of it. And there's the part in the concert where Page brings out the violin bow, and he's using it on his Les Paul. He said, watch what he does with the violin bow. And he's calling out to the four corners. He's doing an occultic ritual live on stage while they're performing at Madison Square Garden. He's summoning something up and sending it into the crowd there. It's stunning when you think about it from that perspective as to what he was doing, his intent. Those people were just there to see a rock show, and he's calling up the demons of the four winds and turning it loose in Madison Square Garden.
Oh my gosh, you are correct. It's the movie. The song remains the same.
Yep.
And it was a live album too.
Yeah.
And I remember
I
watching.
never put that connection together. Like you, I used to go. They would show that at midnight at one of the local theaters, and my friends and I, and we'd been, it's the '80s. We'd been to the arcade or something. We go watch whatever they were playing at the midnight movie, and I remember a few times sitting through "Song Remains the Same" or Pink Floyd's "The Wall" or something like that. But I went back and watched it again, and I never picked up on that the first time.
As a matter of fact, it just occurred to me. Talk about Lucifer, straight up, in your face, so to speak. Think about the swan song emblem.
Yep.
Who else is that supposed to be?
Well, according to the person that designed it, it represents Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, but it could be a metaphor for Satan.
I think because it actually fits a lot of the medieval period artwork of Satan.
Yeah.
As the fallen angel. What I always found interesting was Led Zeppelin used the naked wing guy as the symbol of Icarus, and then you have Iron Maiden's The Flight of Icarus.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember on the little 45, it was the Eddie Grotesque figure with a flamethrower that burns Icarus's wing. And it's the Swan Song guy. I never understood if they were actually trying to make a statement or anything, but
yeah. But Iron Maiden, I've seen them a lot of times. That's probably, I would say, right up there, probably the second or third band that I've seen the most times. Cheap Trick being the first one, but I love that show. And they'd have the giant Eddie come out and menace the crowd, and a lot of their songs are dark. And of course, one of their most famous is 666, the number of the beast, and it draws from Scripture, but I don't think it's saying be aware of it. I think it's celebrating it.
Yeah, well, the song, if I remember correctly, the song, "The Number of the Beast," starts out as a quote from Revelation 13.
Yeah.
It's either Revelation 13, "Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends his beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short." I want to say it is Revelation 13.
Yeah. And then it continues on with that. "Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number 666. And that's they're paraphrasing, out of the book of Revelation.
Well, what strikes me is the song starts out with that quote, but the opening verses and the content of the song is talking about occult rituals.
Yeah, torches blazed,
or
and sacred
a guy
chants were
walking
praised.
into the middle of an occult ritual.
Yeah, torches blazed and sacred chants were praised as they start to cry, hands held to the sky. In the night, the fires are burning bright. The ritual has begun. Satan's work is done. I mean, how more obvious could you?
Work is done.
I remember these lyrics. That's amazing.
Yeah, I was a Maiden fan way back when. Yeah, did absolutely. Yeah, it's
There's another part of that song. I think it's toward the end or maybe the very end of it, which sounds kind of prophetic. "I'm coming back. I will return, and I'll possess your body, and I'll make you burn. I have the fire, I have the force, I have the power to make my evil
And
take its
power to
course.
make
That sounds like
evil
that's
take its
Satan
course.
talking there. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? I haven't really thought about those lyrics in a long
Yeah, when you
time.
go back
But
and
you're
look at this
right.
stuff, and back in the day, it was spooky and it was dark, but it was fun. Wasn't thinking about, hey, we're all here to worship the devil. But I think in reality, that's what we were doing unknowingly.
I agree. I agree. Definitely unknowing, because the draw to the songs is the music, and then later it's the lyric that hits you. And I think many times that's the case.
Yeah, and I've thought about that before. When you really sit down and look at the lyrics and put them in the proper context, there's some pretty dark, evil stuff. I mean, of course, you were expecting that, but I think it's even more evil than we initially thought when we enjoyed those bands in our glorious misspent youth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I never had put two and two together as a teenager. Of course, me myself, I wasn't. Those weren't my brightest years, so to speak. But I just, you whistle the tune, you'll sing it, but you sing it not really thinking about what it is you're actually singing. And then as an adult, and especially as a born again believer, going back and really looking at those lyrics and the context they were written in, um, that's not accidental.
No, that's
And
definitely not designed.
there's definitely a agenda there.
And it's not just in the overt. Some of those are covert. You have to kind of get into those lyrics and break them down and study them, and then what is he really talking about here? And it going being just a simple pop song to a paean to Satan, if you will.
Yeah, well, and now, and Brother Justin brought this up. Uh, uh, a lot of the rap now, there's a lot of occult symbolism, and even lyric wise in it, and the pop music. Most of the pop music now, I'm thinking about, what was it, the last music awards show, and just the absolute non-hidden, very clear demonic worship that's involved. I mean, the song.
Yeah, there's even it spawned a genre of rap music called horrorcore, and it uses like I said,
The
horror
songs, and
and
it's just
death.
out in the open now.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
no need to hide
that
it anymore.
that Farm Hill was part of, well, that rock horror was involved in a killing called the Farm Hill Killing in Farm Hill, Virginia, about 2009, where a guy was like this girl. They went to the concert and he ended up brutally murdering the entire family, and they got a lot of blame about that. And he was fully inspired by that stuff. He was and a lot of people said, he said they were involved in that. So it opened up a lot of occultic stuff too.
So it's far reaching. It's got its tentacles all through popular music and has since literally the 50s and before that. If you look at people like Robert Johnson, and like you pointed out, even hundreds of years prior to that with the Devil's Trill.
Yes, Giuseppe Tartini.
But and you know, and when I was a teenager, and stuff, there were people like John Todd and Bob Larson and people like that that tried to expose a lot of this stuff from a Christian perspective to a secular audience. But to me and my friends, I think it just made us want to listen to it more. You know, you're young and you're rebellious, and like, oh, here's something we shouldn't do, but we can go do. And you know, that was kind of regretful now, but back then it didn't scare us. It just made us more fascinated, I think, with the occult in rock music, particularly heavy metal.
Yeah, and interesting. John Todd. John Todd. I listened to one of his testimonies when he was in the music industry, and he came out and even said, you know, talked about occult rituals that were done over like a master recording.
Yep, and then that was then pressed onto the vinyl so that every time that record was played, that demon was released from that ritual that they'd done behind the oaken doors. I think he said, I've heard that tape too, way back in the day. Church that my parents went to on Wednesday nights, they had a thing about rock music and backward masking things, and they played the John Todd tapes. That was my first experience hearing John Todd's testimony. But if even a percentage of what he says is true, it's frightening to think about.
Well, there's a lot of stuff you got to plow through with it, because I've listened to some of the recordings, but a lot of stuff he said has actually in the music industry now, a lot of that has come full forward.
Yeah, and I believe
he
that
was
he
right.
did.
He was right on a handful of things.
I think he did expose the stuff, and then he was framed for some stuff and put away as punishment. I think he died in jail or not long after he got out. But I believe that was to quieten him. And I've got digital copies of about a dozen or so of those John Todd tapes. If you'd like, Pastor, I'll forward those to you.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Didn't he also come out and expose the Christian music industry too, having a lot of occultic practices?
Yeah, yeah. He claimed that a lot of those bands weren't Christian at all, but that was just their way to infiltrate Christian music and literally make it the devil's music. Pardon the phrase.
Yeah. I do briefly remember him talking about that also. What I find sad is that there've been a couple people in the industry that have and artists as well that tried to come forward, and sadly some of them didn't make it, and then some of the other ones, their reputations were absolutely destroyed, their credibility.
Yeah, and it's like that.
I think the powers that be in the industry destroyed their credibility.
Things like that. If you shine a light on some of that and start to expose it, you're either quietened or done away with, because they, even though it's out there and it's in your face, they don't want it to be as overt as it actually is. And it's fascinating to think about. It's like that way with a lot of the political things too, that somebody, when Danny Casolaro, for example, that was investigating a lot of this stuff, found him dead in a bathtub, and he had said just a few days prior to that to somebody, if they find me dead, I did not commit suicide, but it was made to look like a suicide. So There you go.
Yeah.
People get too close to the truth, and the powers that be, the powers that are actually in control of things, don't want people to know that it's all a big psyop.
Yeah. Well, going back to Crowley real quick, one of the things Crowley said was because he was talking about human sacrifices, and that sacrificing of this person or that person will bring like more power, and that could come in the form of fame, that could come in the form of popularity, riches, or what have you. But you think about that, and then you think about some of the questionable deaths that have happened in rock music, and then how the bands of that member that died.
Yeah, that
How
just
shortly
it seems
after
to
that,
propel them into stardom. And there's so many, like I said, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones. Brian Jones died. Keith Moon from the Who, even some of the more current bands now. Red Hot Chili Peppers. They're not that current anymore, I don't think. But Hello Slovak, one of their original guitarists, passed away. It seems like a lot of these bands have somebody that dies through some misfortunate thing, whether it's an overdose or a plane crash or something, and then those bands propel to stardom. It's almost like there was a member that had to be sacrificed in order for them to fulfill their part of the bargain to get that fame and stardom and fortune.
Well, again, I find it interesting that was in Crowley's writings way back again, before there was a music industry. And what gets me is some of these deaths. I mean, again, not to individuals that are not in law enforcement or not in law, period, can look at and go, wait a minute, that's kind of questionable. How come that was just overlooked? And some of the circumstances are even obvious, but then they throw it out to the public because that's the way it is, and it was an accidental death, and let's move on. And then it kind of seems like the world goes, yeah.
And again, that's like that thing with my friends and I back in the day. You let people know, you expose them to this and show them, this is what this is really doing, and it doesn't seem to faze anybody. I mean, I've watched I don't know how many things about these music awards and some of the Super Bowl halftime shows and things, how there's very overt, very in your face occult symbols and things going on, but it doesn't seem to bother anybody. That's disturbing in its own way.
Yeah. And again, some of the circumstances and some of these deaths are, again, not even to law professionals. I mean, just the average person can look at and go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That explanation doesn't make sense. That circumstance doesn't make sense. Why isn't that being looked into? And again, it's glossed right over. And next thing you know, the band that lost that member to a very strange circumstance, they're twice as big as what they were with that band member when they were alive.
Yeah, it just catapults them in some cases, into international stardom.
Well, if you think about this too, people who who see things that they're not supposed to see, and they get visiting from these men in black, which I think are something else. They're threatened, or they disappear, whatever, or they'll come at them. Is always it's kind of like the movie They Live with Roddy Piper, right? And people were doing good until they put on the glasses and see what's going on and what's taking place, and realizing that there's things living among them that's taking over them and that's killing them. And I think that it's the same way with people who come to know the Lord, who realize what's going on. Their eyes are open to what's taking place, and they're taken out, or they're mysteriously disappeared, or whatever.
But I think it all points back to there is a price that these people pay for their fame and fortune and stuff. And now, is it a sort of a Mephistophelies type deal with the devil, or is it something else entirely? I think it is. I think that there's been, even Little Richard and people like that back in the day talked about that, you had to literally sell your soul to be popular and to have number one records and to be pushed out there by the record companies and the radio stations and the movie studios and what have you. There's a truth in all that, a truism, if you will.
Absolutely. I think there are specific cases, a couple of them in heavy metal. I think that there were individuals that died, and it's always been claimed that it was an accident. But if you look into it, I'm sorry, that's my dog alerting me that there's a siren in the area.
Sounds like a big mean dog you've got there, Pastor.
Hold on one second. But anyways, I'm hoping we could do a part 2 to one guitarist.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that, having a second part of this even before we did this one, and discussing
and a couple other bands, but specifically a guitarist. With a well-known singer, because there's some evidence there. It seems like there's some probable evidence there that would actually shows very possibly a direct occult connection.
And then another band that just occurred to me, Metallica. Their original bassist, Cliff Burton, was killed in a bus crash.
Burton.
Yeah, so it's just like, again, these bands that are just iconic and world known, they've had at least one strange death in there attributed to an accident or accidental circumstances. But when it happens to so many, I think it becomes more than coincidence.
I agree with you 100%. And especially now, growing up, I was back in the early 80s when they first came out and just started getting known. I was a Metallica fan. They're a household name now.
Yeah, they're a big deal, and they've got a lasting effect. And yeah, the first time I heard about them, they were just a little band out of the Bay Area, and a guy that I knew we were at a metal show at a club, and he gave me a cassette tape, and he said, "You got to listen to these guys." And it was Metallica, just probably a third or fourth generation copy of recording of one of their live shows, and I was just blown away. Who are these guys? What is this? And just kind of went from there. I mean, that was in their very infancy, and now, like you said, they're a household name.
Well, and I find it interesting also that back in the early '80s, after Ozzy's stint with Black Sabbath, this guy was like every parent's enemy back then. I remember the bad publicity. Because I was a huge Ozzy fan, and now it's a household name. It's absolutely a household name. How in the world did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think part of it was the MTV show The Osbournes, and I think that was in the '90s that made him into even more of a megastar. But again, he's legendary. The things that he did when he was with Black Sabbath, just some of the shenanigans and things that he got into, and then later on, that may have been pure publicity, but biting the head off of a dove at a meeting of record executives, and just he's literally a madman. Diary of a Madman, one of his first albums there, that and Blizzard of Oz. But everybody knows who Ozzy is.
Well, you look at him. You look at him now. You look at him now, and you look at the show. And I remember when my mom was alive, we used to watch it, and it just it broke her heart because and she said, I believe that was a sign of, my mom said, a sign of judgment, because he had cerebral palsy or something, and had Parkinson's disease and all this stuff. He could barely walk, and his own family made fun of him.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually is very sad, but those first two albums is what launched him, and it was the guitarist of those first two albums that made those albums iconic. The sound, because that really was not the sound of the first 3 years of the '80s, and that became a staple metal sound. And that guitarist died in a plane crash, Randy Rhoads, and that also has a lot of questionable stuff behind it that was never addressed or answered. And like with other bands, is there a cult connection there? It's I think very probably.
And then maybe on the next part, I'd like to delve into some of the people behind the scenes, like Don Arden, who was described by some as a gangster. He was Led Zeppelin's manager, and then Ozzy ended up marrying his daughter, Sharon. So you've got that family connection there. And then you have Peter Grant for Led Zeppelin. Again, I mean, he was known to pull guns on people and things. There's just, I think a lot of those people and their influence and influence peddling are what helped propel these bands into some darker places. And people like that were so ruthless to get their artists out there. I think there's a connection there too, and that may be the ones that suggested to them, "Hey, you need to sign this in blood. You need to make this pact. Yeah, there's going to be some heavy prices to pay, but think of the fame, think of the fortune, think of the limousines, and the big country estates and things." But the promises in Led Zeppelin at one time, or I'm sorry, Black Sabbath at one time, they found out they were broke. That everything that they thought they owned, it belonged to the record company, houses, cars. All this, they didn't have any money. Literally, the label owned them. And a lot of artists have found
Well,
themselves
and
in that position and had to sue the record label to get out of these contracts so they could even get paid for their own work.
and it's interesting. You brought up Don Arden, the head of Jet Records. That was 1974. Guess who came out? Guess who came out and started to expose the occult in music in the industry? John Todd. And it was the year 1974, same year.
Yep.
But yes, we should would definitely like to cover that. Definitely like to talk about the plane crash of Randy Rhoads, because there's
like you said,
there's
for
a lot of
somebody that's
probable stuff there.
not in law enforcement or anything like that, not a private investigator, but there's some things that, to me, just as a layman, don't add up about that whole story. And I know that if I could notice it and see things there, that there's got to be something off with that scenario as it was told.
Absolutely, and not to mention, there is a definite Crowley and occult connection there too. I think that's worth looking into on the next one.
Well, gentlemen, we've got about 10 minutes here left. Any final words or closing thoughts or stuff that you want to kind of dangle a carrot on a stick for the next episode so people will tune in?
Yeah. These bands and it is heartbreaking because a lot of times they end up paying a price and then walking away and losing plenty and or not getting credit for half the stuff they did. And there were members. The first two Ozzy albums, for example, there were some of those members that talked about that had talked about stuff like that, and you know, it is for people that get involved with that are involved with these bands from the beginning, and then something ends up happening to them. Then the band takes off into fame, and they were either left behind or they were possibly the sacrifice. And I think it's very sad. There were over the decades there were a lot of very talented musicians that ended up paying with their lives, basically. And I just think that's horribly sad.
Yeah, and the ones that didn't die mysteriously or possibly sacrificed, they don't live to be old ages. A lot of them don't. The drugs, alcohol, living to excess, it takes its toll. I mean, you hear a lot of people that were involved in a lot of that just passed away at a very young age. Again, we touched on the 27 Club, but beyond that, there are not a lot of them that live into old age. I don't think there's an old age or an old rock musicians home for old rock musicians or anything out there, but it would be sparsely populated. I feel there's not a lot of longevity, and you have a few people that are able to live that lifestyle. Keith Richards, for example, I don't see how that man, any of the Rolling Stones that are still living, I don't see how they've made it as long as they have. I once heard somebody say that in the event of a nuclear apocalypse, the only thing that would be left would be cockroaches, Twinkies, and Keith Richards. So there you go.
Keith Richards, yes. Yeah. By the way, do you know it's interesting? Mick Jagger starred in a movie as Lucifer Kenneth Anger's Lucifer Rising.
Yeah, and there's a
And it
Crowley
was right
connection
around the
there
time
too.
they came out with the
And
song Sympathy for the Devil.
LaVey, there's connection there, and there's a Jimmy Page connection with Kenneth Anger, and he is supposedly responsible for putting a curse on Jimmy Page and or Led Zeppelin. So it, again, as Charles Fort wrote, and I say this all the time, one measures a circle beginning anywhere, but it all leads back to Crowley and basically him. I mean, he's the start of all these tangents that move out, whether it's the LaVeyan Satanists or Parsons and that crowd, or it's again an octopus with 1,000 tentacles, and Crowley seems to be the head of the octopus, at least in rock music, pop music, and film, and just pop culture in general.
Yeah, and again, why the occult's interest in music to begin with? Well, again, there's one end game that's coming to, and that's Revelation 13. And music is one of the strongest lures to use to reach that end, I think. But yeah, I definitely want to look at the occult connection with not only Randy Rhodes' death, but a couple others too, because it's I think it's evident, and it's been overlooked for far too many decades.
And then that's another phenomenon. I think that'd be another tangent. Plane crashes. Look at everybody from Buddy Holly to some of the members of Leonard Skinner to Randy Rhodes to Lisa Lopez from can't remember the name of the girl band that she was in, TLC. A lot of these people, Aaliyah, I think that was another one that died in a plane crash. Plane crashes seem to be a common factor in a lot of these cases.
Yeah, you were definitely correct. But I would also like to say too, praise God. There are even in the heavy metal world, there a few of them have came out and came to know the Lord and Savior Yeshua, Jesus. And I'd like to encourage anyone, especially that was into this world, come to know the Lord Jesus. There is a salvation to this, and there is a good answer out, and that is the Lord and Savior.
Indeed, amen. And I've even heard it put forth that there are people that have came out of that world that had signed a pact or made a blood, signed the contract in blood and things for this fame and fortune, that they've been able to get out of it and break that contract through Christianity, something they thought that wasn't possible because they had signed on the dotted line. They thought it was all over with, but then they had an out that they weren't aware of.
And isn't it a blessed and wonderful thing that that Yeshua, Jesus, paid with blood, so the price is covered.
Indeed. Well, thanks again, Pastor Eric, for joining us. Justin, did you have any closing words for the folks tonight? Okay, so we may not have Justin with us, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Again, Pastor is Eric and Justin from Sound the Shofar Messianic Ministries. You can find them on Facebook. I'll put links in the show notes. Very fascinating side trip into some of the legends of Satanism and rock and roll, the occult influence of popular music going back for decades, if not hundreds of years. But thanks again for joining us, Pastor, and look forward to part 2 of this wonderful talk that we've been having.
Amen. And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's just my pleasure. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for tonight. I'm Steve Stockton. You've been listening to Everything Out There on the Clyde Lewis Ground Zero Radio Network. I'll see you a little further on down the trail. Tell your animals I said hi. Good night, everybody.